Hello everyone and welcome to the city of Weissburg, where in today's episode we will be expanding the historic center that we started in last episode with as an absolute highlight the city hall of Weissburg and the construction of a tram line right through the historic town center. This video is a little bit longer than my usual videos because I simply got a little bit too enthusiastic when I recorded this episode, and to me there was no clear way of splitting this video into 2 episodes, so I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to upload an extra long episode, so I hope you enjoy it. Together with a few graphic issues that I encountered while recording this episode, I had almost 10 hours of raw footage and I probably spent even more time editing it. But without further ado, let's talk about what's happening on screen. So we're starting off the episode with placing some house blocks in what will in the future be the middle of our old town center, and because of that I really wanted to break free from a grid as much as possible, because you see that a lot in these historic town centers as well, which did make finding the right buildings for the blocks difficult at times, especially in the block that I'm working on right now, because there is just not a lot of space and there's a couple weird angles that I need to find buildings for. But with a little bit of help from the PO mod, I finally found the right balance between the buildings, which did take me significantly longer than it looks based on this footage. So while we're finishing up this block, we can start talking about the new way that I will be adding brick surfaces to this city. The idea got recommended to me by an awesome viewer, and even though the idea seems pretty simple, I never thought about doing it this way. So to keep things simple, instead of adding decals that can look a bit buggy from time to time and can also create FPS drops, I will simply be painting decals on the surface of roads with the intersection marking tool mod, and in my opinion this also looks a lot smoother. The only problem I was facing with this technique is that the curbs of the road were also painted over by decals, and then you would say the most sense-making option would be to do that with IMT as well, but I couldn't quite get that to work, so then I resorted to my backup plan of using curb networks. Problem is, they also get painted over by the IMT decals. So at the end I resorted to placing them manually as props until I find a better solution, so you'll see me doing that a few more times this episode, but I'll make sure to speed it up a little bit more and not show you everything of the curb placing, because at some point that gets a bit repetitive and boring to watch. So after some detailing of the street we just built and placing a postal truck, which you see quite often on the most random spots in European towns and also quite often parked in the middle of the sidewalk, we start creating the next block of houses. This one is a bit easier to create though, because it is already more square shaped and I have a lot more space to work with in this block. Again, we're going to detail the street like we did before with the IMT bricks and the curb props, and then we're just going to detail it a bit so that it doesn't look as boring and plain as it looks right now. Here we're detailing the back row of this house block, and the what now is a little green grass square at the bottom of your screen right now will in a future episode be transformed into an actual square, but I decided I wouldn't do that today because I really needed to restrict myself in what I was doing in today's video. I already recorded way too much. So yeah, as you can see, a few details here with a gate together with a small front garden, which is a nice variation from the other buildings in this town, because in most historic centers, buildings rarely have a front garden. I hope you enjoyed those little cinematics, and now it's time to continue with what is my favorite part of this series so far, the City Hall of Weissburg. We quickly copy one of the first blocks we made in the last episode to get a little corner of buildings, which will mark the square in front of the City Hall, and now it's time for the fun part. The building that we're using for the City Hall is the Magna Plaza from Amsterdam, which in real life originally was the main post office of Amsterdam, and now is rebuilt into a shopping center. In our world though, it still functions as the city hall for the town, and after some PO work to make the building look a little bit nicer, we move on to a bit that took me way too long to do and is just a very small detail, but in my opinion it's a great addition to the city. You see that in the original version of this asset there are two huge hanging banners with the name Magna Plaza on it, and I thought that it would be a great idea to paint those banners over and let them say Weissburg. Now the problem was that if I simply did this with the text customization option of PO, the shadows on this building would just bug out a little, and because I'm a perfectionist, I didn't like that. So after some messing around, I ended up downloading some medieval banners from the workshop and painting those over with PO, and after hanging them on the place of the original banners, I could then add the letters of Weissburg, which in the end ended up looking really nice. If it was worth all that time, I don't know, because it took me a good couple of hours to figure the final solution out, but hey, it looks cool. Now that we've finished detailing the City Hall building itself, it's time to build a square right in front of it. For this I'm using the same technique that I used for adding bricks to the roads in the historic town center. Because the square obviously is not a road, I had to add some pavement paths and simply stretch the points out with IMT to fill up the whole square. Secondly, these paths will also function as walkways for pedestrians, so it also has a functional purpose. Now, of course, every town square needs a statue. And in our case, because we have a big city hall, we also need a big statue. For this one, I'm combining a victory statue on a kind of obelisk thing with a fountain to give it a more fancy look. And then I got the idea to add a kind of second layer of the outside barrier of the fountain, which could then function as a kind of second layer of steps to sit on, which you quite often see at fountains. It took a bit of time messing around with PO, but at the end it looked better in my opinion. So we take that. Next up we're going to detail the square with some stains and all kinds of props to give it a more alive and realistic look, instead of it looking like a brick parking lot. Even though I mentioned in the last episode that I found these squares without trees pretty empty looking, For the sake of realism, I will not be adding any trees on this square and instead focus on planters with bushes and all kinds of flowers to fill up the room. So on this place over here, I had a little empty corner, which I didn't really know what to do with. First of all, I was thinking of placing an ice cream van, but then I thought of the crazy idea of just adding a construction site. Because they seem to be digging holes everywhere nowadays, and it's actually not that uncommon to see a small construction site in historic town centers, which are sometimes small like this one, and sometimes even close off a whole square. For now though, I just wanted to add this little detail because why not? Now that we've finished the city hall and its square in front of it, it's time to build one last block before we can move on to the tram line. The first part of this block we already built before placing the city hall, and because that was basically the only really challenging angle in this block and we have quite a lot of space to work with, finding fitting buildings was actually quite easy for this block. Obviously, a historic town center wouldn't be the same without cafes on random spots in the streets. And because I placed this building a little bit more in the back compared to the buildings around it to better overcome the angle here, I decided that this would be a perfect place to add a little restaurant with some tables and umbrellas on the terrace. It also was the perfect opportunity to bring back my ivies again to cover up this empty wall a little bit. Of course, I had to add some bricks on the sidewalk. And because we're closing in on the edge of the old town center here, at least that's what I'm planning right now, but who knows, maybe in 2 episodes I'll change my mind, I decided to keep the asphalted road to kind of start transitioning away from the all brick roads. We quickly add a few lanterns, and unlike I said earlier, only now are we placing the ivy on the wall next to our cafe. Now that we've done that, we can start detailing the inside of the house block, and that is also why you just saw me replace one of the houses with another one. Because the new house has a gate through it where cars can drive through, which is essential to what we're building here. In many historic European town centers, parking on the street is a pretty hopeless task. So many of these house blocks have some parking inside them that is exclusively for the residents, and they access that by some form of a gate or a passage at the ground level of one of the buildings. This makes sure that the car owners that live in this house block can store their cars somewhere without blocking the often scenic roads in the historic town center. Now that we've done that, it's time to detail the rest of the inside of this block with some foliage and a variety of props and decals to make it all look a little bit more nice and realistic. Alright, so now we finished that block, it's time for one of the highlights of this episode, adding a tram line through the historic town center. So we have this main road that's running right next to the city hall and its square, and I thought it would be a great idea to add a tram line to that road. Obviously, the city isn't quite big yet, so as of today's episode we will only have 2 stops, but they will be super detailed, and the tram line will of course be functioning. And over the next couple of episodes, when we expand the city, we will also expand the tram line with more stops. So the problem that I was facing, which is also why I'm messing around with IMT a bit now, is that for my regular roads, I use the blank road custom assets. But for my tram line, I had to use the vanilla roads, which had a quite different road texture and coloring compared to the blank roads. So what I did, I painted the whole vanilla roads over with a asphalt decal and made it just as transparent so that it almost matched the color of my blank roads. For some reason, this worked better than just changing the asphalt color with network skins. And what it also does is remove the vanilla stripes on the roads, which are of course different than I want to have them on my road. So yeah, this intersection was also quite difficult to get it to look nicely. But the idea of it is that because the road to the right isn't a major road and just leads to the first square that we built in episode 1, I do not want cars to cross the entire street and over the tram lines, and will thus only be allowed to merge in and out on the outside of this corner of the main road. I might change up this intersection setup later in the series though, because it all depends on what I build on the other side of the historic town center and how important this road will end up being. And who knows, maybe I will change it up to a pedestrian only zone. So yeah, for now it is like this, but it might change in a later episode. So now we get to the interesting part, the tram stops. Obviously we are not going to go with a boring design, but with a rather unusual design, I would say. I had this problem that the tram tracks were in the middle of the road, and I didn't think it was an ideal solution to basically have pedestrians cross the road to get in and out of the tram. So what I decided to do is to add the vanilla tram track road with a median, widen it a bit with node controllers so the road width exactly matched up with the other road, and boom, we have a tram stop island in the middle of our road. The dangerous part about this design is that that means that trams need to merge on the car lane right before the stop, and cars might not always see this coming. I couldn't really find a completely fitting sign to warn drivers for this, so I just resorted to adding priority giving stripes on the road. Of course, I could have maybe added a traffic light to regulate this issue, but also considering the fact that in these town centers it happens more than often that situations are pretty unclear, I decided not to do it, as it simply looked nice right now, and sometimes you also have to choose for aesthetics. And regarding the traffic flow part, if you're expecting a smooth and quick ride through the historic town center by car, you're not getting it anyway, so it doesn't really matter that there's sometimes a tram stopping right in front of a queue of cars. Moreover, it will only discourage people from taking this road, which also helps giving the tourists a safer experience of the historic town center. So after doing some Google Maps research and also with some great help of my friend Arles, I concluded that the way I striped these tram lanes in this intersection over here is the best way of making sure that cars don't enter the tram lane. Obviously, I could have striped the tram lanes all the way through the road, but in my opinion that just looked a bit bad and they don't do it everywhere as well. But the most important part is that on the intersections and especially on the places where the tram tracks enter the tram lane, there need to be stripes to make sure that cars don't also enter that lane. So by the way, a quite funny story about these tram stops is that originally I thought that in the vanilla game the stops would always be on the side of the road, even on this road with a median, and people would also board on the side of the road. Now I wanted my passengers to board from the median, because that is the entire purpose of this design. And I spent a good amount of time struggling to think of solutions how I could move the boarding spot from the side of the road to the median, until I simply tried testing it, and it turns out the vanilla game already automatically sets the boarding point to the median on this type of road. The reason why I didn't notice this instantly is because I have the automatic placement of the tram stop signs disabled, so I can add my own custom German stop signs, and thus I only noticed it when I started testing, running the game for a very long time, trying to get some passengers to take the tram line, and you can't imagine the happiness I had when I realized that my design worked without me even doing anything to fix it. So now that we finished building our second tram stop of the day, it's time to make the tramline functional. Now the tram depot that I'm building here is only temporary. I'm just placing it so that we can have running trams, and in a future episode I'll have to think of a better solution. For now though, the most important part is to add the tram depot and to way too narrow loops for the tram to turn around, which again, they are temporary. They are not as nice as they should be, but they are just required to have a working tram line so we can get the cool shots and we can experience trams in the city. So as you saw, tram line created, and in this shot you can actually already see some trams running on the right side of your screen while we are finishing the last house block of today's episode. For this house block we're again going to add the parking inside of the block because there's enough space for it, and it looks really nice, together with of course some garden detailing. So yeah, I'll leave you for a quick time lapse. So with the detailing of this house block closing into its end, so is today's episode. This video was quite a lot longer than my normal videos because I simply over-exaggerated with the amount of footage I recorded. But yeah, it's a nice experiment. Let me know how you guys liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already and like this video if you enjoyed it. And then enjoy the tram shots. See you next time.